This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We want to know more, do you? Informed Sources brings our region's top print and broadcast journalists together.
To examine the stories behind the headlines.
And we can all learn more.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this was the week of April Fool's Day, but there was little to joke about as the days were filled with talk of tariffs, job cuts, immigration disputes, and political upheaval, and that was just on the front page. We will claw our way through these stories, plus we'll remember the life of Senator J. Bennett Johnston. Our Future Watch segment will examine the shortage of bee colonies and the importance of the Gulf states in maintaining them. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, Robert Collins, Dillard University professor and political analyst for WVUE TV Fox 8 and Verite News, and Tony McCauley, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to stick with Tony right now because it just seems sort of economically chaotic out there right now. And that's what you wanted to discuss, you know, how it's just kind of touching on so many parts of our lives.
Yeah, the tariffs have just completely taken over the news this week, where President Trump announced sweeping tariffs, which are a tax on imports, for virtually every country. And that's on top of weeks of government funding cuts, you know, various departments, and the crackdown on immigration. And, all of these kind of policies are creating a great deal of uncertainty, which is, of course, the enemy of business folk and people making investment decisions. Immediately, we see that reflected in the stock market, which is down 5%. On the day after he announced the tariffs, and another 5% today, and for the year it's about 13%. And once you get to 20%, you're officially in a bear market. That itself creates more uncertainty because people feel less wealthy and they do less spending. And with the tariffs, what you've got is the worry about inflation, just at a time when interest rates were starting to come down. So you've got people worried about inflation, what's going to happen with interest rates and their jobs, So that's resulted in a lot of economists upping their percentage for us going into a recession, like J.P. Morgan doubled their percentage of the risk of recession. So locally, we've been taking the pulse of people like the Home Builders Association. It was a real estate conference. This is actually just before the tariffs, where Dan Mills, the local head of the Home Builders Association of America, was saying that the tariffs on Canadian soft timber, big element of house building, could add, and other house builders that were there telling us that it could add something like $10,000 to the cost of a new home, we've been talking to people like car dealers as well. I talked to Troy Duhan, who's the owner of the biggest Louisiana-based car dealership and covers 8 states. He was saying, that he would, if the tariffs, if the tariffs proceed on the path that they were announced as, he would expect to see cars, depending on the type of vehicle, car prices up 18% within a month or so. He said to me the surprising thing that he found was that in the week before the tariffs were announced, used car prices shot up by 15%, just as dealers went out to buy cars in anticipation that car prices would rise. And then other things like the immigration crackdown, the cuts in a lot of different programs, government programs like the U.S. Aid Overseas program and SNAP and stuff like that that hits programs that are aimed at farmers, like buying up at subsidized rates their grain. The immigration then, of course, hits industries like the construction industry and the agricultural industry. So all of that uncertainty really is just creating, the worry that we're going to be heading into a recession, interest rates won't come down, stuff like that. That's where we are.
Certainly a big worry. And also, we've seen in the state, certainly, so far this year, some announcements, big announcements, maybe even it might have been the end of last year, some big plants being built in different parts of the state. The one in the data for the AI data, and then also the Hyundai steel plant. And then also, the state has really looked into renewable energy and wind and doing turbines. How is all of this going to impact what we have been so excited about in potential economic growth?
Well, the one thing that everybody says to us is we don't know, because we just don't know. But that's the uncertainty, which of course is, as I mentioned earlier, the enemy of investment. So there's the $5 billion Hyundai steel plant that's supposed to go in. That's an investment decision, and it's also related directly to supplying car plants with steel. The Hyundai car plants in Alabama and Tennessee. And what we've seen just this past week is it's a different car firm, but the kind of thing that we would fear is that Stellantis, the old formerly named Chrysler, announced they were cutting back production in a Mexico and Canada plant, which would result in 900 job losses at plants in Indiana and Tennessee. So as companies like that try to figure out how this is all going to fall out, they're making decisions like that about their investments, about their production, and so on. Another big one that we talked about before, our biggest infrastructure investment here is the port, a new downriver port, which already we're looking at costs that are probably going to go well above the $1.8 billion they've talked about. Well, they're in the middle of talking to their private sector partners now about who will have to contribute quite a bit on that. The cost of building any of these projects, all throughout the city, we've had in the last few years a lot of projects stalled because of the previous tariffs. I mean, that was COVID. Post-COVID, we had the big supply disruptions, but there was tariffs in 2019 as well, and supply chain disruptions, and the costs of building materials went through the roof. Everybody had to recalculate. All those projects went on hold, still on hold.
But the mantra, at least from the Trump side, seems to be, well, it might be hard in the short run, but great in the long run. Does that seem true, or do we not know?
We don't know. What we do know is that anybody who has gone back to their Ferris Bueller's Day Off remembers that the Smoot-Hawley lecture and what happened in 1930. The difference in 1930 was they thought about the tariffs a bit more than we seem to have. They didn't put tariffs on sovereign nations that only have penguins, and no humans. So I think this is a very uncertain situation, and people can't make informed decisions until we know how it's going to fall out. People are talking about a potential long game of bringing manufacturing back
and some of it's
here,
political maneuvering too.
Yeah,
they might disappear before they ever are really.
Is it brinksmanship? I think that's with the soft timber Canadian ones. Those tariffs are announced but not imposed while they talk about them.
Okay, well, as you said, at this point we don't know, and we will continue talking about it in weeks to come, I'm sure. All right, Tony, thanks a lot. All right, Robert, let's go on over to you. An election this past weekend where some constitutional amendments defeated resoundingly.
Yeah, so pretty much across the board, all of the amendments which were all pushed by Governor Landry basically all went down in flames. They all went down in flames basically within a point or two of each other. Amendment 1, which dealt with special jurisdiction courts, went down 65 no, 35 yes. Amendment 2, which was the tax restructuring amendment, lost 65 to 35. Amendment 3, which would have expanded the crimes that juveniles can be charged with, went down 66 to 34. And Amendment 4, which would have changed the dates, moved up the dates of judicial elections, went down 64 to 36. So pretty much
that they all went down with pretty much the same vote.
Yeah,
almost the same
the
vote.
same vote.
Now you can say, well, this is an ideological thing, but I can understand that for number 2. Number 4 people didn't have a real reason to care one way or the other about when judicial elections are going to be. Okay, I mean that wasn't controversial, but still, 60% were against it.
Here's what happened. Amendment 2 basically sunk all of them. So Amendment 2, even though
however many pages.
Yeah, exactly. So Amendment 2, even though it reduced some taxes, remember, Amendment 2 would have removed the constitutional protection from some funds that deal with education, roads, infrastructure, and those funds each have their own constituencies that came out against that. Also, Amendment 2 would have removed the current constitutional protection against putting property taxes on religious institutions. And so a lot of very conservative Republicans said, no, we're not going to have that. We want to keep that tax exemption protection in there. And so people were just angry. And when people get angry, they're going to vote against Amendment 2. And a lot of them specifically for the tax reasons that I mentioned, but most people just didn't understand it. Let's be honest. Most people just didn't understand it. And the taxpayers, when they don't understand something, they're just going to vote against it because they don't say, I don't know if this is going to hurt me or not, so I'm not going to take any chances. I'm just going to vote against it.
And there was loud opposition to Amendment 3 also regarding juveniles being tried.
And so there, a lot of people, a lot of the civil rights groups and the ACLU, they came out and said, we don't think this basically violates the federal Constitution. We don't think this is going to stand. So there was a lot of campaigning against that. And so what happened was people were just angry, and so people went into the booth and they just voted no on all of them. Basically, I mean that's basically what happened. I looked at some turnout numbers. This is interesting. So a statewide turnout was 21%, which is actually high for amendments. Most amendments only get in the teens, 15, 16, 17%. Turnout in the city of New Orleans was 31%. So turnout in the city of New Orleans, in Orleans Parish, was 10% higher than statewide turnout. And in New Orleans, people voted 91% no on all the amendments. That's a pretty staggering statistic. And just by comparison, in the last governor's race, turnout in New Orleans was only 27%. So more people
question those numbers a little bit.
In New Orleans actually turned out for an amendments election than they did for the governor's election.
So the electorate really fired up. Now, of course, the governor said it was far-left liberals that defeated this, but obviously Republicans also voted against it.
Well, so the governor said it was Soros money. We don't really see any evidence of a lot of Soros money coming in. We've only found one organization, the Vera Institute, that even gets Soros money. But regardless, there was money coming in on the governor's side to support it too. What I always say is that in a close election, in a 50-50 election, maybe Soros money or other dark money can move the needle a point or two in either direction. The governor lost this election by 30 points, 65 to 35. Soros money cannot account for a 30-point loss. This is the people, the people across the, and you can look at precinct by precinct returns. These amendments were losing in very conservative Republican areas. Now obviously not as bad as they were losing in the Democratic areas in Orleans Parish, but they were losing in rural Republican areas. They lost in Lafayette, where the governor lives.
So I guess there's going to be some regrouping, particularly about the tax package, and we'll be talking about that. But right now, let's also talk about the Jefferson Parish Council election.
Very interesting election in Jefferson Parish between Ricky Template, who's a former councilman at large, also a former state representative, Tim Kerner, who's the current mayor of Lafitte, and Andrea Manuel, who's a school teacher in the district. Template and Kerner are Republicans. Manuel is a Democrat and is also black. And so what was interesting in this race is that Template and Kerner basically ignored Manuel, so she didn't have a glove laid on there. The campaign between Template and Kerner became very nasty. Lots of attack ads. Kerner actually filed a lawsuit against Template to try and get the attack ad taken down. Full disclosure, I actually appeared in one of those attack ads. It's the first time in my career I've actually appeared in someone's attack ad, and it was because the attack ad dealt with an investigative story that we did on Kerner for Fox 8, and so I was kind of shocked to see my image showing up in the tag. Yeah, okay. And so so the numbers in that race were well, let me just give you the money first. So Templet spent $388,000 on the race. Kerner spent $173,500 on the race. Andrea Emanuel spent, wait for it, $2,705. Andrea Emanuel ran first. She ran first with 36% of the vote, and Kerner ran second with about 35.4% of the vote, and Templet was eliminated. So he was the establishment candidate. He spent $388,000. He was supported by the parish president, by the mayor of Gretna, and he was eliminated. I actually did some math, and so based on he got 4,499 votes. So I divided that. Based 388,000. He spent $87 per vote to be eliminated from the runoff.
Okay, and so there is a runoff. That's the bottom line right now.
There is a runoff on May 3rd. Okay, so we'll do it all over again.
All right, Robert, thanks a lot. So, Ian, let's go on over to you because we're talking about these amendments going down. I mean, you wanted to talk about, are we seeing political backlash?
Yeah, you're just combining these first two stories we've had. This was a week for kind of like trying to think about the political mood out there between what happened with the amendments here and what's on voters' minds now with the tariffs. I mean, you know, what's going on. I'm confident that for none of us here or anywhere else probably has the outcome of a judicial election in Wisconsin ever mattered at all. Okay, and for a lot of people it did matter this week because it was a Supreme Court runoff, a 7-member court that was split 3-3, and so here was this vacancy. Now, in a lot of judicial elections, including this, they're not supposed to be by party. They're nonpartisan, so you don't register as a Republican or a Democrat. Because they're nonpartisan. However, the media fill in, and they fill in that role for you. Here's the liberal, here's the here's the conservative, and so it really became a race between the liberal and the conservative. And because of that a lot of the media saw this as maybe an indication of how things are going across the country, especially like for Donald Trump. And the implications of this, it could have an impact because it's 3-3. This fourth vote could have an impact on decisions about abortion, about redistricting, about union issues. And so it could have a major impact in Wisconsin that could be felt in other states around that. And so because of that, by implication, it was really important. Then the other side issue is that the conservative, a guy by the name of Brad Schimmel, got $3 million from Elon Musk, plus something like $17 million from organizations associated with him. So that group had like $20 million invested in him, and that's kind of unusual for a state Supreme Court race. And that, I think, really made people nervous across the country. I think people still, a lot of people love Donald Trump, a lot of people hate Donald Trump, but I think the feelings are more galvanized on Elon Musk. A lot of people I just don't think want him around, and maybe that was the factor. And so the liberal, Judge Susan Crawford won. She won handily, and so that's seen an indication. Well, maybe this is a good news for Democrats who haven't had much good news lately. We don't know. I mean, there's going to be other elections. It could be that people respond differently about that than the way that they respond to Trump per se. But it was seen, I guess, as being sort of a bellwether election. And just looking what happened, I did think you might be seeing
the two seats held in Florida, they had very narrowed margins as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we're going to have to move on with this, but certainly an interesting time in terms of economy and politics.
I do think it may be that maybe voters are starting to feel a little bit pushed around a little bit too much. Okay, between
after only 90 days.
Yeah, and in Louisiana with Landry's first term and with Trump, that the people in authority are pushing a little bit too much more authority. I mean, maybe there's that kind of uneasiness with the voters.
Definitely backlash, definitely pushback.
And that's the importance of going to that ballot box on Election Day. All right, thanks a lot, E. Dawn, over to you. Honeybees, how are we doing?
We are doing all right. Nationwide, commercial beekeepers in the last 8 months, from June 2024 to February 2025, lost 62% of their hives. The reasons for that are multi. One is the climate. Higher temperatures affect flowering cycles, and then it becomes harder for the bees to know where to go to find their food sources. There are parasites, the worst of which is called Varroa destructor mite, and that mite weakens the bee's immune system and it helps them spread a deadly virus. There's also colony collapse disorder, which is a bit of a mystery, which is causing the worker bees to just abandon ship and take off and not do their work. But I talked to Commissioner Strain today with the State Department of Agriculture and Forestry, and he says there's good news for beekeeping in the state of Louisiana, that our industry is actually picking up. We also have a really, really cool program I want to dedicate most of the time to, called, and I'm going to read it so I get it right, the Apprenticeship Project for Growing Beekeepers and Honey Producers. And this is a project, it's federal money. Now, we don't know, we'll go back to these stories, we don't know if these grants will continue to come from the USDA, but they fund usually 4 to 5 programs in high schools per year in the state of Louisiana. It's a competitive program. The schools have to apply for it, and that money goes, it pays an educator. It also provides resources, up 5 hives, the bees, cinder blocks for raising up the hives, water sealant to seal them off, beekeeping suits and gloves and the smokers that you need, and all the materials. And then the schools that are raising these bees get to keep the honey and keep the colonies. And I learned today, and I knew nothing about beekeeping, but beekeepers can and do ship off their hives to other states. Mainly from here, they ship off to California because almonds are one crop that cannot survive without a honeybee. Without honeybees, almonds do not get pollinated. They do not survive. And then they go from California to the Midwest. And in the Midwest, they're pollinating things like sunflowers and other crops. And then they come to Louisiana to survive winter. And that's where we come into play for this whole thing. Our climate is good for surviving winter, except for winters where we have a foot of snow. But our climate is really, really good for the bees to continue to populate. We have about 750 registered beekeepers in the state, and year-over-year data, in 2014, we had 47,000 colonies, bee colonies in the state. 2024, we had 68,000. So we've gone up 20,000 colonies in those 10 years. So it is growing. Our honey production in the state was up 40% in 2024 from 2023. 2023 was a horrible year for bees and a lot of other things in the state. If you remember, we were in drought conditions then, and the drought was really not good for our crops and that sort of thing.
That's right.
So the bees are coming and they're doing well, and then they provide this lovely local honey, which is good for all of our immune systems and other things, but it's also big business. So these high schoolers are learning. You said your granddaughter has been participating a little bit.
She sent me a picture of her in one of those bee suits, and then she was really very interested in it.
Yeah, and our warmer temperatures and longer foraging season for the bees is very conducive to them growing and sustaining.
And of course, we have Louisiana honey, as you said, on our grocery shelves, and so that's
Yes.
important for us too. All righty, Don, thanks a lot. E, over to you, because we learned this week of the passing of a longtime U.S. Senator for Louisiana.
I wonder if there's going to be a tariff on honey. All right.
Well, it's local, so you can't put it down.
Okay, that's true. Okay. J. Bennett Johnston died that week. He was an interesting politician. He wasn't really a colorful politician, but a very competent politician. And he first developed in public attention in 1971 when there was a governor's election. He was a state senator, little-known state senator from the Shreveport area, ran for governor with 15 other candidates, and so it was a crowded field. Managed to get into the runoff. I think one thing that happened is he pretty much had a lot of North Louisiana to himself, and all the other candidates were from Central and Lower Louisiana. So he got into a runoff against Edwin Edwards, and in the runoff, it was a high-profile runoff. He lost. He lost Edwards, but what that campaign did is it drew a lot of attention to him. And if it happened, right around that time, the incumbent United States Senator, Alan Ellender, died. So there was a special election to fill that vacancy. So here's Bennett Johnston, who everybody knew by now. And there was a little bit of a sympathy factor because he ran and he won. So he ran for state senator and won. And went on to be, now, between being a governor and being a state senator, just in terms of your career, a governor is term limited and serves 4-year terms. A senator has no term limit. Okay, and served 6-year terms. And so he was able to serve like 24 years as a senator, where if he'd been elected governor, he'd have served for 8 years. And I was once at an event one time and actually saw, he didn't know me, but I just asked him, but I asked him, I said, going back then, when you lost for governor, weren't you better off? And he just kind of smiled, okay? And he said, I can't comment about that. But yeah, he was much better off because he got to have a national career. And Robert, I know you worked for him briefly at one time. What were some of your thoughts about him?
Yes, I was a staffer for Senator Johnston from the late 1980s to the early 1990s. I worked with him when he ran against David Duke in that statewide election in 1990. Traveled the state with him. He was the quintessential Southern gentleman. He was very bipartisan. He had as many Republican friends as he did Democratic friends. He could reach across the aisle. We just don't have anyone like that in the U.S. Senate anymore. Just with that ability to work both sides of the aisle. So yeah, it was very sad when I heard that he died. He will be missed.
And he was a very effective senator too for the state of Louisiana.
Very effective. Big friend of the oil and gas industry. Brought a lot of money home for the state.
Right.
Yes.
There's even the waterway around Shreveport that they built 5 locks to divert the Red River into the Mississippi, something like that. So, it's called the Bennett Johnston waterway.
Yes.
So he was very effective. When he lost Edwin Edwards, one theory was that on election day, LSU was playing Ole Miss in Oxford. So a lot of people from upstate were in Oxford who might have voted for Bennett Johnston.
All right, we have to move on now, but wonderful Senator J. Bennett Johnston. All right, E, over to you.
Yeah, the Downtown Development District had issued a paper today where they developed the economy of downtown over 2024. One thing they reported is that the number of jobs, that there are 56,000 people who work downtown now, which is really kind of surprising. I thought it would be people evacuating, but they're kind of optimistic about the future. Also, in terms of growth, the highest growth rate is among restaurants downtown.
All right, Dawn, over to you.
The city is ready to shine its shoes and get back out there. French Quarter Fest is next weekend, and city officials in Downtown Development District are hoping to build on the success of Super Bowl and Taylor Swift and Mardi Gras and all the other
big
things.
crowds. Okay, Robert, quickly.
So legislative staffers have informed me that even after the devastating losses for all these amendments last weekend, legislators are trying to break away little tiny parts of those amendments and are going to bring them up in future elections as separate amendments.
All right. Tony, quick.
The port I mentioned earlier, huge project. Keep an eye out for a report coming out from the Regional Planning Commission about this raised toll road they're going to have to build to make that work, to see how much that's going to cost, because that's going to be crucial.
Okay, all right, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
From Masterpiece to Nova, Antiques Roadshow to Agatha Christie.
And of course, stepping out and Informed Sources.
We are pleased to support public television.
It's been our passion.
For a lifetime.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation, proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.